One more time.
Minute steak is a quick cooking steak. I love this dish because it's restaurant quality at home. The peppercorn sauce is kind of elevated. The potatoes are really crispy. It's really easygoing and approachable, but packs a punch. Hello, my name's Tracy. I'm the chef and co-owner of Birdie's in East Austin. Today we're making one of my favorite French bistro classics, minute steak with peppercorn sauce and rosemary potatoes. These are the ingredients you're gonna need to pick up. Of course, the star of the show are steak, beef stock, brandy, red potatoes, shallots, garlic, rosemary, thyme, butter, heavy cream, green peppercorns in brine, salt and pepper, and a little bit of sherry vinegar. First thing, we're going to cut our potatoes. So I like to cut the red potatoes into big chunks. I don't like to go too big because I like to smash them. I'm just looking to cut them into even size pieces so they all cook evenly. If you can't find red potatoes, you can use Yukon Gold potatoes or fingerling. Really, any waxy potato will do. Just don't use Idaho. Once the potatoes are cut, I like to put them right into water so they don't oxidize and turn color, and topping with salt. Just for the sake of time and so the potatoes don't get waterlogged, I turn up to high right away, and then once it's at a moving simmer, then I'll knock it down to around medium or whatever heat's appropriate to maintain that simmer. I'm going to grab my shallot, give it a quick peel. Now I'm just going to give the shallots a quick mince. If this makes you nervous, maybe your knife's not super sharp or you're not really confident in your knife skills, that's okay. You can just slice it really thin. I'm just grabbing the garlic. We just need 2 for this recipe. You just want to pop the garlic out of its shell. These are going to be for our potatoes in a minute. I like to peel off the rosemary from the stem and give it a chop. I really love rosemary with this dish. It just brings a really lovely piney flavor to it. I do like to cut the rosemary a little bit smaller so I don't get big chunks of rosemary in every bite. The thyme, we're just going to leave that whole on its sprig, and I'm going to check the potatoes to see how they're doing. The potatoes have come up to a boil. I'm going to reduce the heat so it maintains a simmer. The potatoes are ready whenever a cake tester glides on through with no resistance. If you don't have a cake tester lying around, you can use a paring knife or a fork. Once the potatoes are cooked, strain them in a colander. After the potatoes are drained, place them on a plate with a paper towel, and once they're cool, we'll give them a smash and into the pan. While the potatoes cool, I'm going to divide my steak. This steak is around 9.5 ounces. Before I season, I like to give it a quick dry off with some paper towels. So I dry it off so I get a nice sear and there's not too much moisture hitting the pan. Once that's nice and dry, I just give it a liberal seasoning of salt and pepper. When I season, I like to season above. If I season too close, I'm not getting a nice even spread of the salt. It just goes in one place. So always whenever you're seasoning, go from above, little Salt Bae action. So preheat your pan on medium-high. Leave it there for 30 seconds to a minute. Once that pan's warmed up, I like to confirm it's hot. I just put my hand over it, and if it feels pretty warm, we're good. Also, be careful. With steak, I like to use grapeseed oil. It's a neutral oil and it has a high smoking point. I do love olive oil, however, it will burn at this high temperature. You kind of want to get the temperature till right before it starts smoking, and then you're good to go. I like to press it down. You can do this with a spatula. I use my hand because I do work with steaks a lot. The steaks are going to go about 2 to 3 minutes per side. It depends on how thick the steak is and how long it's tempered. The steak's only tempered for 5 minutes or so. It's going to take a little bit longer. If it's well tempered, around 20 or 30 minutes, it's going to go a little bit quicker. I took the steaks out whenever the cake tester came out to be pretty warm. I like to just leave it inside the thickest part of the steak and then give it a check on my wrist to make sure it's pretty warm. If you like your steaks more well cooked, you can make sure the inside's very hot. Another trick, if you don't have a cake tester around, is give it a touch, and then you can touch the part on your hand. If you make this guy and then just touch it right here, it's about that softness for medium rare. Once your steak's cooked to your desired temperature, let it rest for 5 to 10 minutes in a warm spot. You can also loosely cover it with foil to keep it warm, and then I'm going to dump out the hot extra fat and save the fond from the pan. The fond is the little bits of meat left behind. All of that's going to flavor the peppercorn sauce. Now that the potatoes have dried and cooled, I'm just going to smash them with the heel of my hand. This is a very rustic technique, and I'm just getting them nice and squished so I can get them golden brown on both sides. Next step is to preheat the pan. I like to preheat it to medium-high. Kind of like with the steak, we'll get it nice and hot, and then we'll carefully go on with grapeseed and then carefully down with the potatoes. I let them go 2 to 3 minutes until the base becomes golden brown. Once they're golden, I'll flip them carefully away from me so I don't burn myself, and then I'll add the smashed cloves of garlic to the pan. That'll steep into the oil and make everything really fragrant. After about 2 minutes or so, we'll take the rosemary, stir that in very carefully, and let that bloom and let the rawness cook off. And I'm just going to very carefully put it back on that plate that's been lined with a paper towel, and I'll reserve this in a warm place. Back to our reserve steak pan that we saved. I'm back up to about medium heat. I'm going to add a tablespoon of butter. Let that melt for a second. Now that the butter's melted, I'm adding the shallots the whole time. Give it a pinch of salt, and I'll be stirring this often so it doesn't burn. Definitely don't walk away at this point. Don't let your dogs or your spouse or your friends distract you. I cook the shallots for around 30 seconds to a minute, just until it looks like it's starting to be translucent. It'll start getting very light brown around the corners. That's when you know it's almost done. Go in with black pepper, bloom the pepper for about 10 to 15 seconds until it opens up. And then I'm gonna go in very carefully with our brandy, give it a good shake and a stir. After adding the brandy, I'm really careful to stir it all up and get all of those bits of fond and flavor, so that ultimately goes onto our sauce and isn't left behind in the pan. So just bringing it all the way down to where extra liquid isn't running around the pan. If you don't reduce it all the way down, it's gonna taste like raw alcohol. The way I know that it's ready is when I can drag a spatula or a spoon and it kind of leaves a trail. So I'm going to add my beef stock. Our beef sauce is reduced by about 2/3 to a half. It looks a little bit thicker. Now I'm going to add my heavy cream and the green peppercorns and brine. I'm still cooking on medium heat. Reducing the heavy cream will take around 1 to 2 minutes. Once it starts to thicken and I can do the drag, leave a trail move, then I'm going to reduce the heat to low and mount in the butter. Don't walk away at this point. You want to be stirring this all the time. We're just going to be melting the butter and make sure the sauce is super creamy and bring it to the right viscosity. I like to check to make sure the sauce is the right viscosity or thickness by taking the back of a spoon and making sure it's what the French call nappe. If the sauce isn't a nappe and it's too thin, just keep cooking it, let that water reduce until it does become to this point. If it looks like it's getting a little gloopy or too thick, that's totally fine. Just add a little splash of water to thin it out a touch. I'm gonna add sherry vinegar, just a couple drops. Give that a stir and make sure that's really tasty. When tasting the sauce, make sure it tastes bright, peppery, and rich. The butter and the cream bring that richness. If you need to give it any more pepper, if you were light-handed before, you could give it now. And then if it tastes a little flat and too heavy, give it a little more sherry vinegar to elevate it and give it a little more acidity. In the home stretch, our steak is rested. Find the grain. If you're not familiar with the grain, it's just essentially those lines that run through the meat. If you don't slice against the grain, it might taste a little chewy. So you really want to cut that grain for a more tender bite. I like to slice around 1/4 inch thick. That way it's not too chewy. And then plate up. Once the steak has been sliced, I like to shingle a little bit for a nice presentation. Of course, finishing salt, and very carefully and evenly season each slice. Last but not least, favorite part, we're saucing our very beautiful steak. It smells so good, really aromatic from those herbs in that sauce, from the rosemary and the potatoes. I cannot wait to try this minute steak with rosemary, potatoes, and peppercorn sauce. The sauce is so peppery, bright from the sherry vinegar, a little sharp from the green peppercorns and brine. The steak's really tender. The potatoes are really soft on the inside, but crispy on the exterior. The rosemary gives it really nice piney note. Goes awesome with the steak sauce. Thanks again for joining me cooking this minute steak with peppercorn sauce and rosemary potatoes. Please drop in Birdie's anytime you're around Austin. Say hello. Once again, I'm Tracy, the chef and co-owner.